Rolling.
Hans Zimmer.
That's it?
Yeah.
I like the way you said his name. So we're good? This is it? This is the real thing? All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our annual discography review. Today, I'll be covering Hans Zimmer. Very exciting. I want to do something different. I've been a big fan of score music for quite a while. And he's really the reason I got into buying, anyway, and really listening to score music on its own as a separate entity from the films themselves. So yeah, today we're going to just run through all the stuff I have of his and briefly talk about each of them and see how it goes. So we're going to start with a non-score thing that will kind of give you an idea of what he did at the beginning of his career. He did a lot of synth programming for a lot of European bands in the early 80s. So in 1980, he did this album, which is great, The Age of Plastic by the Buggles. You may know them because of Video Killed the Radio Star, which is a great song. This album is really good, by the way. I just randomly bought it a couple years ago, thinking I should maybe explore his synth programming early band stuff. And this is a good one. This is a fun little, re-release. So then we'll get into his actual music. So he worked under this guy, Stanley Myers, who's probably best known for The Deer Hunter, who was a film composer in the late 70s, and did a lot of work in the 80s as well. So Zimmer was kind of an apprentice of Stanley Myers, and Stanley Myers saw the benefit of Zimmer's like synth background and the electronic stuff that he could really bring to the table. He thought, well, there's a lot of action movies in the 80s. He was thinking this is going to be good to have this guy on my payroll, but also kind of teach him and try to send him out on his own. So they started working on a couple of things together, one of which is this movie Insignificance, right? I've never seen this movie. Nicholas Roeg. I don't have anything to really say about the movie, but Zimmer has some actual cues here that he's credited to, which is great. And this is a fun little vinyl because it has a lot of dialogue as well. It's kind of an interesting mix. There's music, there's classical music, there's some songs, and then there are some score songs. So it's pretty good, worth checking out. And that's 85. So then after that, we can get into his first kind of foray into the action stuff that he'd sort of become known for, I think. On this project, Stanley Myers was hired by the filmmaker, and Stanley Myers said, well, I want to bring along my apprentice, Zimmer, and I think he'll be good at running with a lot of the more scary scenes and action-filled scenes in this movie. So, again, I've not seen this movie, but he's actually listed first on the credits, Hans Zimmer, which is exciting. And this was kind of a cool reissue that was put out a couple years ago. In fact, I don't know that this was ever released until this vinyl came out from Arrow Records of the Arrow Video fame. It's worth checking out, if you're a fan anyway. Then after that, we're going to get into the CDs. So then after that, he, again, still working with Stanley Myers, worked on this project called Castaway. Another movie I have not seen, nor do I know much about it, but he did a lot of the cues with Stanley Myers on this piece as well. This soundtrack was a re-release that came out, and it came with this movie that Michael Kamen did called Mona Lisa, which is a great film. I've seen that one. But Castaway, Hans Zimmer, Stanley Myers, still working together. Boom. That's 87. And then after that, it's kind of when he was able to branch off and start doing his own thing. And that all started with this movie, A World Apart. It's another movie I haven't seen, but it's great. It has that like African vibe. A lot of like traditional sort of African songs are on it, as well as mixed with some of the score stuff. There's this track on here that if you want to check it out, you don't have to check out the whole thing. You can just download or listen to this song, A World Apart Suite, which is like 17 minutes long, and it gives you a good idea of what this has to offer. And it's a really good soundtrack, and it helped him because it's what landed him his next project, which is kind of where he really started to take off. So he was working late one night in a studio in London. I think he talks about it as if it was in like a really shady part of town, and late one night, like really late, he said it was like 10 p.m. or something, which seems like an odd time for somebody to go knocking on somebody's door. He got a knock at his door, and it was Barry Levinson. Barry Levinson is, Hans Zimmer doesn't know who he is describing a project he's working on, saying he's a filmmaker, and he's hoping that Zimmer will come out to Hollywood to make it. and Zimmer was caught by, oh, you want me to come to Hollywood and start scoring films? Yes, I would love to do that. And that film is Rain Man. Rain Man's been released a couple times, I think, on CD and vinyl, but this was one of the releases that features the score music. I think the release that came out before had songs from the film as well as score stuff. And this one from Perseverance Records is just score only. And it's great. It's a really simple thing. There's like a couple main themes in this film, but it's very catchy, and I can't really picture this film without thinking about the music as well. So it's good music. After that, some movies I've never seen, and he had this release which was just 3 songs, and it's 2 really long suites from 2 of these films, and then 1 selection from this other movie called Diamond Skull. So Burning Secret, Diamond Skulls, The Fruit Machine are movie titles. I've not seen them. Have any of you seen these? I don't know. I'm sure people have seen these films. I just haven't sought them out yet. So this was just kind of a release he did, and I don't know how excited I get about listening to 20-minute long songs. Sometimes it's a little bit of an endeavor, so I don't always love that. But these are pretty good. It's good checking out his early stuff. You kind of really see the progression of where he goes. So that is bringing us still into 88/89. And then in 89, he was able to kind of really get out there and take off again into some more American stuff. Driving Miss Daisy, very famous. I feel like a lot of people know the score, but I could be completely wrong about that. It's good. I don't really remember this movie that well. I saw it when I was a kid. I don't know that I've ever revisited it, but the music is great. It's got this great little piano part, very whimsical and charming. So 89, he's starting to kind of get a name now in Hollywood. Not for what he sort of became known for, I don't think, but at the time he was doing a little bit of a mix of stuff, but definitely electronic based. And then later that year he worked on Black Rain, which was with Ridley Scott, who he had a long and still has a long relationship of working with. But this movie's fun. It's got a lot of the classic Hans Zimmer elements in it. I feel like this might be the first example of where he's sort of really diving into that electronic based rhythm, and like it's an electronic propulsion, I feel like, is kind of a good way to describe a lot of his music. And you kind of start getting that here, and there's a lot of mix with some like old Japanese sort of musical instruments and things like that, I believe, that he brought into this process, since it takes place, I can't remember, in LA in Japan, or maybe San Francisco. Might not even be in California, but definitely partly in Japan, if I remember right. So we're still in 89, right? And then we moved, into the 90s, and he then did this film, which I've never heard of. Great release, 2 songs on it, The Island and Revenge. I've never seen it. These 2 cues are really good. They're both very long, and there's this very cute picture of him in there. Look at him, looking so good, looking so young, Hans. That was my favorite thing about this, was this picture of him. I really liked it back in the day. So that's 1990. We're still in 1990 with one of my favorite soundtracks of his that I don't think he likes. I feel like I've read a couple times that he's not a big fan of this. I think it's funny, though, that it then was released on a special edition soundtrack by La La Land Records a few years ago. I think it's now out of print because it's so good. Days of Thunder, great movie, great soundtrack. I feel like if you were raised, if you're around, if you're in your late 30s and you kind of grew up with this film, it's hard not to like it. It's a lot of fun. The music makes me feel like I've just won the Daytona 500. That's how good it is. There's some cues on this that like really pump me up. The main title is great. The song Car Building is really good. What's the song I'm thinking of? Oh, The Last Race. The song The Last Race is like 10 minutes long. Just listen to it. If you're driving your car, it's going to be hard for you not to race people next to you, want to crash into people next to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful little song. And look at Tom Cruise looking great as ever. Days of Thunder. Check it out. Very good. I think still in 1990 now. Yeah? Okay, good. We're on to this movie, Pacific Heights. It takes place in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. It's a thriller, sort of. Yeah, it's just a thriller. It's like a pretty straightforward thriller, and I feel like, again, I haven't seen a couple of these other films that he had done, but I think this might have been the first thriller he did, And the tracks are just called Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And that's it. There's 4 songs on this album. But one of them in particular, Part 2, is really good. There's this bit in the music that sounds very reminiscent of something that was to come in a few years on my favorite soundtrack of his, actually. There's like this sort of like westerny vibe at part of it, and then it gets a little jazzy, and there's like this flute rhythmic thing going on. It's actually a very good score, if you're looking into checking that out. So that's 1990. Now we're getting into 1991. I cheated a little bit here because I don't actually own this since it's been out of print forever, and it's very expensive. It's like $200 for the CD. I'm not going to do that. But so I did at some point download it, and it's the White Fang soundtrack. So this release was by Entrada, came out in, I don't know, sometime maybe like 10 years ago, and it's actually a double disc release. The first disc is by Basil Polidoris. I'm not sure if I know how to say his name right, but who's really good as well. And then the second disc was Hans Zimmer. So what I understand is both of their music pieces made it into the film, and Zimmer's stuff was more used for the action pieces. I think it was, and this happens a lot with score music, where the studio or the filmmaker is not exactly happy maybe with how something's played, or maybe they showed it to an audience and the audience isn't reacting to certain scenes how the studio or filmmaker would like. So sometimes they're like, well, maybe the music can be fixed or tweaked or whatever, let's bring in somebody. And Hans Zimmer started to kind of get this happened a lot, and you'll see it later, but this was maybe like the first big incident of that happening. Instance, that's what I'm trying to say. All right, still in 1991, a charming little film, Green Card, it's a great little score. I think he actually conducted this one as well. That's something that a lot of composers don't do, is they don't actually conduct like the orchestra when they're recording it. It's something that he's not really known to do. One of his early ones, I can't remember if it's this one or not, he did that for, but the song Restless Elephants and the song Greenhouse on this are really good. It's a good soundtrack. Very charming. Peter Weir, great filmmaker. Still in 1991, probably something that he's pretty well known for, Thelma and Louise. There's been a couple releases of this as well. There was definitely a CD that came out that had mostly songs from the movie, as well as a couple tracks of score music that he did. There's been a newer release of a CD that has some soundtrack. I got this one a while back from Kritzerland, I think, which is a German-based company, and it's good. It's got all the essential tracks on here. It's a really good little thing, and it was a kind of a good mix for him because I don't think he had done any sort of country-esque type things with acoustic guitars, and makes you feel like you're sort of in Americana. And I feel like this is kind of the first instance of him doing that. There's a couple times in the 90s where he did something similar to this, but I think Thelma and Louise is probably the best of that, and also the first one. So still in, and again, this is Ridley Scott, back with Ridley Scott directing again. And then he made this film score, Backdraft. People love this score, I think. I was rereading about it online a little bit, and it seems like there's a lot of love for this score. I don't really get it. I also don't really get this movie, but it was the first time that Zimmer worked with Ron Howard, who he also had a long career working with. Backdraft. After that, this is kind of an interesting story, I guess. This movie K2, it's about somebody climbing some mountains. Is that Everest? I don't know. K2, is that Everest? No, it's not Everest. What is that mountain? I don't know. Anyway, it's a mountain climbing movie. So apparently the American release has a different there's a different score by somebody else, and then the European release was the one that they changed the music and Hans Zimmer did it. So there's only 2 tracks on this as well, The Ascent and The Descent. Very exciting. It's fine. Again, they're like 25 minutes long each. They're okay. Still in that same year, we had Regarding Henry, which is good. It's a really good score. It kind of sounds reminiscent to me of Rain Man a little bit. It's like a little funkier version of Rain Man. There's some great tracks on here. I remember the first song, Walkin' Talkin' Man, is really good. And then the last one, Buddy Grooves, also really good. I think this has been out of print for a while, but if you can find it or download it or stream it online, it's a good soundtrack. It's a good, really early Hans Zimmer soundtrack from 1991. So then I'm missing one which I thought I had, but I don't have. That's A League of Their Own. That you can get. There's never been an official release of the whole score on its own, but I think on the soundtrack there's a couple pieces of music that he did, and that's good as well. That would get us into 92, as with this, Radio Flyer. Definitely saw this when I was a kid. No memory of this movie, but the music is good. It's kind of, again, that sort of playful, whimsical thing that he sort of started doing on Driving Miss Daisy, and he's done it a couple times since, and this is also into that sort of style of Hans Zimmer music. And then he kind of got back into the African music sort of vibe with this movie, The Power of One, which I've not seen. I've heard really good things about. I do need to see it. It's a great score, and I believe it was the first time he worked with Lebo M, who is the guy who sort of does that famous singing at the beginning of The Circle of Life. So he worked with him again on The Lion King, and I think this might have been the first time they worked together. But this is a good score, really good score for a movie I've not seen, especially. There's a lot of really good music on here. Check it out. Toys? I don't know. I don't remember anything about this music, actually. I probably should have done my homework a little bit more on this one. Let's see who's on this. Anybody good? Some jazz. Ron Williams talking. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, of course. As you would... Oh, and Enya. Tori Amos. I'll have to listen to this again. I don't know anything about it. Do you like it? Let me know. This is a compilation that he just did the main theme for. He worked on some of the music as well, but I believe the main theme was sort of his big contribution to this. And this was a TV series, I believe, that came out in the early 90s, still in 1992. It's good. This movie, Younger and Younger. I always liked this cover. Don't know anything about this movie either, but the music is good. It's got this great picture of... Who could this be? I don't know. Somebody riding a motorcycle in the back that makes me want to watch it. Very early 90s. Now, I believe this starts off 1993, if I remember right. So that's 93. And then, still in 93, we got Point of No Return, which I guess since Black Rain is kind of the first big backdraft, I suppose. It's more of a drama. This is like his first big action thing. And I feel like this sort of sets off a long string of him really being known for scoring successfully a lot of action films in particular, and that's kind of, I feel like, what he's known for by the public. So I do like, there's a lot of orange going on here in that title treatment in the back. This disc, pretty sweet looking, very orange. Don't see that very often anymore. The soundtrack, by the way, is not great, in my opinion. House of the Spirits, also 1993. I've never seen this movie. I've always been kind of fascinated to watch it, so I really should cue that up and check it out. I love the soundtrack. It's really good. There's only 5 songs. They're all really long, but there's something really good about it. It seems like it could be a sort of spiritual precursor to what he did later in Mission Impossible 2. There's a little bit of like this Latin or Spanish sort of musical influence in this that kind of comes and goes, and it's really nice, and there's some really good themes. It's a really good score. This again was kind of a cheat. I'll do the cheat first, only because they have a soundtrack of it but never an official release score until recently on vinyl. But I found kind of all of the music from True Romance, like the unreleased score stuff, and had downloaded it because I'm a nerd, and put them on a couple discs. So I mean, the movie is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of great score music on here, a lot of great songs. There's a lot of like Elvis, I think maybe there's some Chris Isaac, Charlie Sexton. There's a lot of really good stuff on these, and so I kind of compiled these based on cue sheets I'd kind of seen online and whatnot, but it's good. Obviously, you probably can't find that, but that's worth checking out. But then they recently re-released that soundtrack on vinyl, or released it on vinyl, the score, and this is Enjoy the Ride Records, and it's good. It's fun little package. It came with an extra little bonus tracks on this little purple 7-inch, which is kind of nice. It's nice packaging, you know. I feel like soundtrack fans are lucky that when they like release vinyl now, or even CDs, I mean, they really pull out the stops, because I feel like only, you know, real collectors are going to want to pay the amount of money they're asking for it. This one, I think they had a couple different variants. This one is this sort of, I want to say they wanted this to be like a car color, but it's nice. And the score is great. My wife came home last night while I was re-listening to this, and she thought that I would want to kill myself after listening to this, because there's this theme on this called "You're So Cool," which is sort of the main theme that I feel like everybody would remember from this. If you heard it, you'd probably recognize it. It just plays a lot on the soundtrack. I want to say like 6 tracks just have this, and there were a few of them in a row that played it, and she wanted to, I think, murder me. But again, it's a nice package. And that song, "You're So Cool," and that sort of theme, I don't really know if there's much validation to this, but I've definitely read about this. There's a famous German composer called Karl Orff. His music, or music that he had done, I think, was used in that movie that Terrence Malick did in '73, Badlands. This score for True Romance sounds very reminiscent of that. I think, from what I can tell just by my ear and what I've sort of researched, it seems like Zimmer definitely used that, was playing that, and he's German as well, so I'm assuming he was a big fan and that was an influence on this soundtrack, but it works really well. This is a good soundtrack. There's not a lot of score music on it, but Cool Runnings, great film from the early 90s. There's some very triumphant sounding score music on this. It's also just a great soundtrack. It works out well for me because I'm a big Jimmy Cliff fan as well, and you get to hear, I can see clearly now by him on here. It's good. Wailing Souls are on here. Forgot about that. It's very good. And some Hans Zimmer, great, triumphant action. Maybe we're going to do some great things music. Cool Runnings. That's still in 93, if I remember right. Is that right? Yeah. And then we kind of get into 94, where he, for the first time, works with another longtime collaborator of his, James L. Brooks, the filmmaker. I'll Do Anything. It's a movie with Nick Nolte. Score music is so funny. A lot of these, especially like early on, I feel like this is more common. There are 5 songs on this album, one of which is a song not by Hans Zimmer, and then the 4 score tracks are just simply named Matt, Burke, Kathy, Jeannie. Character names. And you kind of get all the themes of the movie and those character themes in there as well. I don't really remember much about the movie. The score doesn't really stand out to me either in my mind, but I'm sure if I remember right, it's very much like the other stuff Zimmer did with James L. Brooks. After that, he did this movie in 94 called Renaissance Man, which I remember loving when I was a kid. I haven't seen it in a long, long time. I think it was directed by Penny Marshall, R.I.P. Penny Marshall. Yeah, I don't really remember much about it. I was actually re-listening to this morning, and it's much better than I remembered. I think I thought I would be saying not positive things about it, but after hearing it again this morning, I enjoyed it. It's good, so check it out. Still in 94, then we can kind of move over to something he's very well known for, and the only time he won an Oscar. What a shame that is. Lion King. It's obviously been many releases of this, but Disney Records has been releasing these legacy collection versions of a lot of their soundtracks, which are really nice. They basically all come with a second disc of unreleased stuff, demo things, unreleased songs, unreleased score tracks, as well as these drawings and illustrations and liner notes and stuff. They're really fun. And this one in particular is really good. There's a bunch of extra Zimmer stuff on here that I hadn't heard, and some just instrumental demo stuff, which may not interest all of you, but it actually is cool to hear. You kind of hear some early like synth versions of what he sort of mocked up, essentially, and I find that pretty fascinating. So it's cool artwork. Lion King, great film. Oh, and I should note, I'm a big Elton John fan, so that was exciting for me, for him to work together with Elton John. And in that same note here, I've got how to get that right. Picture disc, Lion King. I listened to this again last night as well, and woke up this morning with Circle of Life stuck in my head. So it's great. This actually sounds pretty good for picture disc. Sounds pretty good. They don't always sound good. Lion King. Good job, Hans. Still in 1994, we're sort of now getting more into his big action, his foray into the action world. Drop Zone, much like Point of No Return, it's okay. It sort of falls in the middle. I couldn't hum a song from this. I don't remember any themes at all. But Wesley Snipes, great. Crimson Tide, is a great score, great film. Hans Zimmer's proud of this one. I remember hearing him talk about it pretty frequently. This theme, Roll Tide, on this soundtrack is so good. It's so good, man. If I ever need to get like really pumped up for something, that is the song I listen to. It is, I don't know, there's something about it makes me feel like I'm a man. I don't really know how to describe it other than that, man. Like, I remember in college that I would listen to the song Roll Tide before I would leave to go anywhere, before I would go to lunch, before I would get out and leave the house, and I would do push-ups. I'm not an exercise guy. There's no reason, I'm not gonna get buff, but there's something about it that made me really feel like I needed to fall in line and like get like pumped up and just feel cool. I don't know. It's a really great theme. It's one of my favorite scores of his. There's a lot of long tracks on this. There's a couple of them that are definitely over 18 minutes. Like, the total running time of this is 1 hour and 17 seconds. And there's only 5 songs. But there's some really great stuff in there. But the Roll Tide theme, especially, oh man, I'm getting excited just thinking about it. So then we get into 95, and he's working on this movie, Something to Talk About. I don't really remember much about it, about the movie, but the music is, again, kind of, it's sort of playing into that Thelma and Louise, sort of like a slice of American, middle America, I think is kind of what he's going for. Sort of picture, I feel like they live on a ranch maybe in this movie. I could be totally wrong about that, but there's a lot of like country-esque type themes and motifs in this soundtrack, and it's okay, it's not bad. And he worked with a guy named Graham Prescott on that soundtrack. Same year, Beyond Rangoon, which I've not seen, and it's kind of, there's some stuff he did that is in between sort of bigger titles like Pirates and Things that he did later on that this kind of reminds me of. It's very much of the mid-90s action Hans Zimmer-y, but just not as memorable, I feel like, in my mind. Same year, 1995, he's working on this movie that Chris Columbus directed called 9 Months. The movie's very charming, but this is one of my favorite scores of his, actually. I think that he sometimes is forgotten about for some of the more romantic and sweet stuff he did, and this one in particular, some of these tracks are really great. Like, I feel like if I listen to them and think about something hard enough, or imagine having a child or something, I feel like they could make you tear up, They're really good, really sweet music. Probably the sweetest stuff he's written, I think. Some of the sweetest themes. They're really nice. That's 95. So then we get into 96, and the most important thing he ever did, in my opinion, Broken Arrow. So I love this movie. I like John Woo. This movie in particular I really love. I kind of have a soft spot for it, I guess. But the music is great. It has so many really great themes that I feel like it's sort of a pinnacle of his action scoring self. There are maybe like 4 different main themes, but there's one in particular that's very, I don't know, it's very westerny themed, and it's just something about it's pretty badass. I actually got to meet him once, and I asked him about this soundtrack because I love it, and I thought, well, I wonder what he thinks about it. And he didn't say a ton about it other than when I sort of hummed the main theme that's so good and so, iconic from this film. He did kind of smirk and say that he was very proud of that. So that makes me happy to know. But this is great. Listen to this. Get this version if you can. There's so much ridiculous amounts of music on this that nobody really needs, but I listen to this one frequently. I think that's a thing that I have all these, and sometimes you kind of forget about them all, but there are definitely at least a dozen of these that I listen to pretty frequently, and this is absolutely one that's always in rotation. It's really good. That same year, 96, he got to work with some of the most classic actors in American history, and that's the Muppets. This movie's great, by the way, very fun, and the score is really good. It's sort of his, I think, if I remember right, this is kind of his first chance to work with some pirate themes, and this score is great. The songs, the numbers in this are really good. It's just it's a fun little score. Check it out if you can find that, for sure. And then in the same year, 96, he did, right, 96, did this come out? Oh my god, if I remember, yeah. This movie, The Rock, is the best movie maybe ever made. But this is really the soundtrack I have to thank for for getting into score music. I bought this immediately after I saw the film. I begged my parents for so long to let me go see this movie. They're like, no, it's rated R and it's gonna be very violent. And I read that there was a sex scene in it. You can't see it. And I was like, come on, please let me do it. So I went to see it. And my life was changed forever after I saw it. And I went immediately to, what was the store? It was like one of those stores, those record stores they used to have at malls, like a Sam Goody or something like that. We had one where I grew up, and they didn't have it, of course. They didn't have any soundtracks, but they could order it. And it was like, back then, it was like $21.99 to order soundtracks like this. So I was like, I don't care. I didn't have any money, but I was like, yeah, let me get that. I convinced my parents to let me get it. And I've definitely worn this CD out probably the most because I listened to it a ton in high school. It's really good. So there's a bunch of people that collaborated on this, and I read that Hans Zimmer kind of came in last minute to sort of help out to kind of boost it up a little bit. But here he worked with a lot of people that are sort of on his roster of, other composers, Nick Glennie Smith and Harry Gregson Williams. One of the interesting things about Hans Zimmer is he started this company way back in the day, Remote Control. I think it's just called Remote Control. And he kind of created a place where all of his friends could sort of work on scores as well, help him out, and then build their resumes up and then get out on their own. So Nick Glennie Smith and Harry Gregson Williams were two of the first people I think that he worked with a lot back in the day. Also Rupert Gregson Williams was around at that time as well. And then a bunch of other people that you'll kind of see that it's funny, if you read through all the liner notes, you'll see their names pop up, like, they helped do this, they helped do some synth programming here, they were a musician on this one, they conducted this score, and then they pop up and they've got their whole, own careers of composing music, which is pretty cool. Still in 96, The Fan, Tony Scott, now working with Ridley Scott, a longtime collaborator of Zimmer's, his brother, Tony Scott, for the second time, because Tony Scott did Days of Thunder as well. But The Fan is a very forgettable movie. The score is great, and I just was recently trying to dig up some more information about this because there's only one song on here, well, two technically, but one suite of music that Zimmer did. And I was trying to read about this recently to see if it will ever get an actual official score release or not. And a lot of things that I was reading were talking about that. I guess he's very proud of the score, which is kind of interesting. I think it's sort of forgotten. But he actually worked with Terrence Trent D'Arby, I think that's how you say his name, on this track on here called Letting Go, which is good. I think he composed a lot of the music. I'm imagining he didn't write any of the lyrics, but he did work on this as well. So The Fan, it's good if you're looking for a little bit different. It's not like his usual sort of action music. He worked with, again, Harry Gregson Williams on this piece, The Whole Wide World. It's not completely clear how much he contributed to this, but definitely something that he worked on a little bit, if nothing else. I know nothing about this project, but the music is good. And then that ends 96, and we're now in 97 with Smilla's Sense of Snow. I remember this probably is the first movie, because it was after The Rock, that I specifically sought out because his name was attached. I think that sort of started a long lifetime of me searching out films that I had not heard about or wouldn't normally see because Zimmer's name was attached. And it's kind of interesting that the composer brought me into these films. And this movie's good. It's a good little thriller, and there's a couple good themes on here. This Isaiah's theme is really a really wonderful little slow, but sort of melodic theme that's good. Same year, 97, he worked on this film, The Peacemaker. I remember nothing about this movie except that those two actors are in it, George Clooney, Nicole Kidman. I don't remember it being particularly good, but the music is also just kind of, I don't know, it feels like a lot of the middle-of-the-road stuff he did in the 90s, kind of like Drop Zone or Point of No Return, where it just sort of falls into the background and it does its job, but it's not necessarily something you would want to put on, at home. But despite that, La La Land Records did a re-release of it, 2-disc special edition, and if you ever wanted to hear more than you could ever want of The Peacemaker, this is the edition to pick up, that's for sure. He worked with James L. Brooks here again, got nominated for an Oscar for this score, if I remember right. As good as it gets. Great score. It's very charming. It's a very, very charming piece of music, and there's some other good pieces of songwriting on this. Nat King Cole's on this. Art Garfunkel's on this. Sean Colvin. But Hans Zimmer's stuff is really good. I'll have to watch this again, but it's good. Music's good. And then because it took off into be such a big sort of phenomenon, the Lion King musical, which I normally wouldn't have thought of to put in here, but he did work on a couple pieces of music that were based on things he had done for the movie that ended up, making their way into the musical itself. But another composer, Mark Mancini, actually worked on most of, I think, the compositions, like translating from the score that was into the score that was then used on the Broadway show. But Zimmer also composed a couple of those pieces here, so it's worth checking out. Elton John, the best. And then in '98, he had kind of a big year because he was nominated for 2 Oscars, one for this film, The Prince of Egypt. Sticking with some animated films. The movie is pretty good. There's a couple tracks on here that are really good. What's that one song that I remember really liking when I was a kid? Oh, All I Ever Wanted, I think. It's great. I remember thinking that was really fun. But his score to this is pretty great. It kind of, whether this is good or not, it sort of, this movie, this soundtrack, The Prince of Egypt, and the soundtrack that Jerry Goldsmith did for The Mummy are what I immediately imagine when I think about visiting Egypt. If I ever wanted to visit Egypt, those are just the sounds that I imagine I would want to hear. It's probably not very good, but that's just what I picture. Thin Red Line is probably, Broken Arrow is my favorite of his scores, but this is maybe the best thing he's ever written. And the movie is garbage. I hate this movie, and sorry if you like it. I cannot get behind it. It's so bad, but the music is really beautiful. Every track on here is really good. The Coral Atoll is great. Journey to the Lion is kind of the one I think that he was busting out when he started to tour recently. But it's a really, really great soundtrack to listen to from start to finish, and it's something that I could listen to constantly in the background. This is definitely one that is heavily in rotation. It's really good. Check it out if you've not heard it. He worked on this project that I don't really know much about called The Last Days, and this says on the back, complimentary copy, not for sale. So this will be a promo copy here, but it's good. I don't know anything about this project other than this music, which is really good. I've tried to find this too, and I can't. Spielberg produced it. It's something about, I think, concentration camps, but I'm not really sure. I guess a documentary about that. Oh, apparently it won Best Documentary Feature. Well, look at that. So it's a documentary. Well, I didn't look very hard. I guess I'll have to try to find this again, but the music is really good to this. So that kind of takes us through the end of the 90s, and we get into 2000 when he really started to output some popular things. Not this first thing. This movie did not do well, but he got to team up with Elton John and Tim Rice, who had done the lyrics to some of the earlier stuff like The Lion King. Got to team up with them again for this movie, The Road to El Dorado. I actually really love this. I'm a Hans Zimmer and Elton John fan, so it's sort of, hard for me not to like it. But this is really good. There's some great tracks on here. The score is really good that Zimmer did for this. It's I don't know, I think it gets kind of forgotten, but there's some really good action themes on here, and there's a really good friendship theme for these two guys who are taking this trip together that I really like. It's very good, and because I'm such a big fan of both Zimmer and Elton John, I had to find this, which I believe has been released as a CD, but there was this cast and crew edition that was released. Of course, I couldn't find it because nobody's selling it. Because it was probably just created for the cast and crew in limited amount. Well, I found all those tracks and downloaded them, and it was very nerdy of me because it just had more of the score essentially, and then a couple tracks that Elton hadn't released on that other thing. So I needed to get it, and it's great. If you can listen to them online for sure, and they're really good. And then after that, he was again nominated for an Oscar for the score to Gladiator. This is his signature up there. This is when I met him. I said earlier that I got to meet him. So he came to the school I was going to in college, and at that time they did this thing where they would have a guest of honor, and the guest of honor would show up. You could sign up to try to be at a dinner they would have with him, and there were basically 5 or 6 students that were able to go to a dinner that was just down the hall from where they were screening his film. So you would miss the screening and you'd be at dinner with him. So I got to go to dinner with him, which was great. I talked to him a lot, or a little bit. I talked to him a little bit, but I did talk to him about Broken Arrow, as I said earlier. And I brought this with me because I think it was the only one I had with me in college, and he signed it for me, which was very nice of him. He was very nice. This score is great. I mean, it's classic Zimmer. There's like a lot of great motifs on this. I can't remember exactly, but there's this one that has like a waltz vibe to it. Earth or Sorrow. It's one of these early tracks, and I really like that song. It's actually maybe one of my favorite, but the action sequence themes in this, the battle, track 3, are so good. So good. Really good. Classic Zimmer. And then right after that, same month of release, he did the music to Mission Impossible 2, working with John Woo again of the Broken Arrow of fame. This is the soundtrack, so I'm showing it here because there is one Hans Zimmer song on here, and this track in particular, this Hans Zimmer song is not on the score release of this, and this one is the one that I think about all the time. I love this version of the song Naya. It's one of the themes from the movie, and it's based on the character's name, Naya, played by, what is her name? I'm gonna look it up. Tandy Newton, right? Of course. But it's like I have to have this because, you know, this Metallica song is fun. This Limp Bizkit song is great. Got Rob Zombie on here, Butthole Surfers, Foo Fighters with Brian May. There's some really good bands on here as well. But this Hans Zimmer track is excellent. It's like a different version of this theme, and it is something that I never skip if it comes on a playlist I've made, or if I'm out for a walk and it's on my, iPod or something. I never skip it. It's so good. Then the score he obviously released, which is really fun. It's like as bombastic as you can get, right? It's so loud and fun and silly variations of the Mission Impossible theme. It's just, it's like, this will rock you to your core. It's really great. If you love Zimmer, check that out. Then he completely changed his pace and worked on this film called An Everlasting Peace. This was directed by Barry Levinson, who did Rain Man. It's so strange. It's about these two guys in Ireland who they're like enemies, if I remember right. They don't like each other, and then they start selling wigs together. The score is great. It's by him and the Jigs, and it's very Irish sounding in a very great way. It's a good little score, and what a great poster. Wig on Earth. I love it. It's good. And it's funny because all of these scores from 2000 are so different, and then he gets into 2001, and he gets into some more mellow stuff. The Pledge, which is it's a really good score. I remember not liking this movie. Sean Penn directed it. I don't remember much about it. Jack Nicholson's in it, but the music is good. It's very haunting. He did it with Klaus Badelt, who is one of the guys who were on his roster of, I don't really know what to call him. It's a roster of fellow composers, I suppose. So The Pledge, it's good. Then he did Hannibal, which was directed by Ridley Scott. He worked a lot with Ridley Scott during this period. He did Gladiator, this one, and then another one in this year as well. So 2001, Hannibal. It has this thing that kind of annoys me on soundtracks. I know that there was a second Gladiator soundtrack released, and it has a bunch of dialogue in it over the music. I'm fine with dialogue on a soundtrack if it's not over the music, but this one, there's a lot of Anthony Hopkins like reading letters he's written to, or I should say Hannibal has written to Clarice, and it's him like talking, speaking, reading these letters, and it's so annoying. I'm like, I want to hear the music, dude. Shut up, Hannibal. But it's there's some good pieces of music on there, and he worked with, I feel like there's a couple pieces not by him, either Klaus Badelt or, yeah. This guy that he had worked with on The Pledge, Klaus Badelt, had some input on this and has a couple tracks that are just by Klaus Badelt here as well. He then worked with him again. He's obviously in favor with Hans this year. This is a Herzog film, Werner Herzog. This movie Invincible, the score is by Zimmer and Badelt as well. And it's a really good soundtrack. I recently watched this movie. I've always loved this poster. I think it's really interesting. And it's definitely an interesting little movie. If you like Werner Herzog, it's worth checking out anyway. This might be one of his most like minimal scores. There's not a lot going on. It's very slow. But but also kind of haunting, similar to The Pledge. It's a good little companion piece actually to The Pledge. Those two they're good. Same year, 2001. This movie, Pearl Harbor. The music is good, not great. It's kind of like, it feels like outtakes to The Thin Red Line to me. There's a theme in this, maybe it's on this track Tennessee or Brothers, Tennessee maybe, that feels like the step sibling to The Thin Red Line. Do you need to own it? No. Should you check it out? Definitely. I should watch this movie again. So bad. Then also in 2001, Riding Cars with Boys was Penny Marshall again. He definitely worked with a lot of the same filmmakers again. I think they kind of, they come to talk. You like read some of the liner notes from some of the filmmakers he worked with a lot, and they're always talking about how they got Zimmer involved during the writing process, or even before sometimes, just with an idea. And that Hans Zimmer really contributed to not only the movie with the music, but also sometimes with how the stories turned out, which was kind of interesting. So it's mostly a soundtrack, but there is one score piece on here by Hans Zimmer, and I'm going to totally butcher this name. Heitor Pereira. It's this guy he's worked with a few times. I believe he plays the guitar. He's also scored some things. So he worked on this. And this piece of music on here is really nice, but the soundtrack's good. Cyndi Lauper, Rare Earth. Come on. Can't go wrong, right? The Jelly Beans, Sonny and Cher. Good soundtrack. Still in 2001, he worked with another project on Ridley Scott, Black Hawk Down, which is a good score. I really don't remember thinking too highly of this film, but the score is really good. The song Mogadishu Blues is great. Ash to Ashes is really good. It's a really good soundtrack. Josh Hartnett, where are you, man? What happened to you? Are you still acting? Hans Zimmer. That was 2001. Now we're into 2002, and I was reading earlier that I forgot. This is the only thing he did in 2002. Maybe he just needed a break. I actually loved this movie. It's fun. This movie, Spirit, Stand of the Cimarron, is probably the most action adventure animation like story I've ever seen. It's like if Arnold Schwarzenegger was an animated character and had made this film. That's kind of what it feels like from like the late 80s. It's great. It's pretty fun. So he did the score, and the music and songs are by Bryan Adams, who did a lot of like soundtrack stuff in his time. So the Bryan Adams stuff is good. The Hans Zimmer stuff is really good. I don't feel like people talk about this very often when they talk about him, but there's I think 5 songs on here that are score music. Run Free is great, and The Long Road Back is great. Those are probably the 2 to check out if you're going to check this out. But Run Free, Long Road Back, Hans Zimmer, nailed it. Look at that horse. Spirit. Still have a lot to go. Oh, good. So 2003, Last Samurai. Working with Tom Cruise again. Woo! I love Tom Cruise. This movie is great, and as I get older, it really continues to grow on me. The score, I've always loved. I think I had the soundtrack, lost it, and then had to re-pick it up, and so it has like this promo thing on it. But I love it. As like kind of like The Thin Red Line or Broken Arrow, I feel like as a whole, you can listen to this from start to finish, and it's really wonderful. There's not a bad note on there. It's a really well thought out, well-composed piece of music. And I know that he likes this one as well. I feel like Zimmer is a big fan of this. I hope he watches this. Somebody shows him like, look, this guy thinks you like this one. And then Zimmer somehow comments saying, no, I fucking hate that one, dude. It's great, though. Same year, 2003, Tears of the Sun. It's fine. I'm not going to say anything about it, I guess. Pirates of the Caribbean, 2003, same year. It's obviously very famous, this music. I was discussing with somebody earlier who thinks this is probably his most recognizable theme. They're probably not wrong. So what's interesting is you can't really get the real story on this, but as far as I can understand from everything I've read and heard in the past, so that guy Klaus Badelt I've talked about a lot recently, who was definitely somebody working with Hans, gets the credit for the composing of this soundtrack. But for everything I understand, Zimmer was always on as a producer. Last minute, I think the filmmakers or producers or somebody wasn't thrilled with how some of the themes were turning out, or just something was missing, they felt like. And so everything I've heard is that Hans Zimmer came in, and basically wrote the Jack Sparrow theme that everybody kind of knows today over a night, like, at 9 p.m. He's sort of famous for holding night hours as kind of his time for, I think, working on stuff. I think it was like 9 p.m. They're like, hey, we're having a problem. Can you do something? And by like 5 a.m. the next morning, he had the demo version of the Jack Sparrow theme that we all know now. So good for him. This movie, Thunderbirds. I don't know. I don't think I saw this. The music is very forgettable. Sorry, Hans. But it's like, you just worked on Pirates of the Caribbean, dude. You just saved the day. Can't always do that. Shark Tale. Awful movie. The music is fun. There's only one score piece on here. The soundtrack is all over the place. We got Sean Paul with Ziggy Marley, Christina Aguilera and Missy, Justin Timberlake in Timbaland. Oh, the Pussycat Dolls, man. I forgot about them. Ludacris. Soundtrack's pretty good. The score music's fun. I think because I didn't like the movie at all, I haven't really revisited the soundtrack recently, so that's on me. I need to. King Arthur. This movie is kind of ridiculous, but the soundtrack is good. It's kind of, I feel like this happens a lot where he'll have something like The Last Samurai, and then he has this where you're like, oh, well, I can see how that's kind of good, but it's not. I would just rather listen to the other one. I feel like there's a lot of like step sibling sort of scores he has, and this came out in 2004, if I remember right. I think we're into now, and this is good. There's some really great stuff on here, but it's not as good as something he had just done, which I would rather listen to. Sorry about that. We had to change the battery on the camera. I say we because it takes a team of people to put these beautiful videos together. All right, so we're still in the year 2004. I have this whole note thing here that I put to reference, but I haven't really been referencing it, so I've probably been missing things. Mr. Zimmer is back with his buddy, director James L. Brooks for Spanglish, a movie that I actually like or watch more anyway than As Good as It Gets or any of the other James L. Brooks things. It's a really good movie, and the soundtrack is great. I feel like this one is out of print, as a lot of soundtracks of his are, but you can find this one cheap all the time. So if you're looking into the Hans Zimmer thing, check out Spanglish. It's great. So then he released, or he didn't release, but some people released, a couple compilations. Hans Zimmer, the British years, and Hans Zimmer, Good Morning America. So I wouldn't have purchased Good Morning America if it wasn't that it came with the British years when I just bought it a while back. It was a great deal for both of them with free shipping, so I couldn't really pass it up. So Hans Zimmer, the British years, great picture of him, right? That's what everybody wants as their headshot. It's good. Now this one I wanted to get because it has, I don't know if you remember, but one of the early ones that we talked about was this little 3-track compilation called like new music from films or something. And Burning Secret was one of the movies. The Fruit Machine was one of the movies. And so they have those 2 tracks here as well, but there was a 3rd track on that compilation that isn't available on this. And likewise on this one, they have a soundtrack from My Beautiful Laundrette, as well as a little piece of music from A World Apart. So My Beautiful Laundrette was actually the first piece of composing that Zimmer was able to do with Stanley Myers. So My Beautiful Laundrette was, 85, it must have been. Is that right? Let me check my notes. Hold, please. Hold. 85, yes. My Beautiful Laundrette. It's a great little movie. Daniel Day-Lewis is in it. It's a really good movie, actually. And the score is actually very, very interesting. And so I don't know that it's ever been officially released. I feel like I looked for it recently. I couldn't find it on vinyl or CD, the whole thing anyway. So here it comes with a piece of that music. It's only 4 minutes, and they're singing over it because it's one of those tracks. But it's good, and you get a little glimpse into what the score was like. So this is worth having for that reason if you want to check out early Hans Zimmer stuff, and you don't have to look for all the things, because you can find this pretty affordably. So on Good Morning America, it's when he had come over to America and started composing stuff. And so it's got number 1 and 2 tracks. Come on, Broken Arrow, of course. Why? Because it's the best thing in the world. After that, 9 months, Point of No Return, Beyond Rangoon, and Backdraft. Just an early compilation of some of the early things he did. I think his early hits, if you want to say, or things people sort of started to recognize him for. So these compilations came out 2005. And they're good. If you can find them both cheap and you're looking at just, either completing your collection like me or just, testing out some of his stuff, it's a good way to go. After that, he gets back into some more animation, Madagascar. I remember really hating this movie, but the music is great. It has this one theme in particular. On here, it's called Zooster's Breakout. It's so good. It's like all of that great 90s action stuff he did, but done in a way that is kid-friendly. It's just so weird to sound, because it's just music. It's just, music with no words in it, but somehow it has a softer edge to it. It's like a harder, rocking, softer edge version of that 90s stuff, and it's great. It's a really wonderful piece of music. I think he really likes that one as well, because I've heard him talk about it. Not that that means anything. This is an interesting thing that he worked on, this project, The Ring and The Ring 2. He has a relationship with Gore Verbinski. Gore Verbinski, the filmmaker who made The Ring remake, the American remake, had directed the Pirates movies, and so he had started working with him, and this was kind of I think an interesting idea for him to get into horror, which is not something, I'm trying to think, I don't think other than that movie, The Zero Boys, that he did early on that has, I think, some like action horror elements, this might be the only piece of horror music writing he's done, and it's a really good score. I love horror movies, and I like when the soundtrack stands out a little bit in a good way, like John Carpenter's stuff in particular, but there's some really good stuff on here, some like really, I want to say classy composing, I guess. This Is Going to Hurt is a great track. Check it out. And there's another, I feel like there was another track on here I really like. Oh, The Ferry. The Ferry is a really good song. But this is really good. It's worth checking out. If you're looking at trying to find something that Zimmer did differently, he co-composed it with a couple guys, Martin Tillman and Henning Lohner. Martin Tillman he's worked with a couple times. This guy Henning Lohner, I'm assuming it's a man, based on the name, is I don't really know much about that person. Sorry to Henning. This is a good one. I want to try to pronounce this. Der Kleine Eschbar 2. It's some animated film that I have never seen, but I had to get it because I'm a completist. And Hans Zimmer works here again with his old friend Nick Glennie Smith. And for not knowing anything about this movie at all, this is a great soundtrack. I really liked it. I remember when I got it, I was like, okay, I don't know what to expect. I put it on, and it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Check it out. I think you can find this pretty cheap, actually. So this has never been officially released. I remember on like Discogs, I found the For Your Consideration Academy version as like a listed thing that somebody had listed for sale at some point. I would have happily bought that had that been available. That was not. And I found this, which I've only seen once, The Weatherman. I'm a huge Nick Cage fan, and this score is good. It's very good. I sadly, before this, so he worked on The Rock, which has Nick Cage in it. He also worked on Matchstick Men. So Matchstick Men I missed. That came out in 2003, just a quick sidebar. And I love that film, and I love that soundtrack. I cannot find it. I don't know what happened to it. I definitely owned it at some point. I couldn't find it, and I'm kind of pissed about that. It was another early 2000s outing he did with Ridley Scott. Anyway, so The Weatherman. This came from some fine seller in Greece. This person in Greece may have made this themselves, I don't know, but it does contain all the music from the film, which is great. It's a great little bootleg release, and it sounds good. So it says it's by Firstborn Records, so maybe it's official, or maybe that's Firstborn Records based out of Greece. I don't know, but it's good. It's worth checking out if you can find it. So then he finally starts to work with Chris Nolan, who he's now been working with for a long time, on the Batman films. Sort of revamped, I think, what everybody thought Batman should sound like. He worked with James Newton Howard, who I love as well, and I remember him telling me when I went to that dinner with him that his office is next to James Newton Howard's. Like, their offices in Santa Monica, I believe, are both next to each other, so sometimes they'll use each other's staff or sound stages or scoring stages or whatever, and so they worked on this together. And what they did is pretty great. It's very minimal, very laid back, but still kind of rocking. The sort of Batman theme is just like this slow crescendo up note and then a slow crescendo down note. But it's great. It's kind of fun. All of these track names, if I remember right, I should have looked this up before. I believe that they're all Greek names for bats or bat. They're somehow bat related. So like track 1, Vespertilio, and track 5, Artibus, and all this stuff. I think that there's some kind of like, you know, Greek origin words for bat stuff. I don't know. Anyway, the soundtrack is really good. This is probably the Batman from the Nolan trilogy that I watch the most as well. But it's a really good score. And then completely opposite of that, he goes to work on The Holiday, which is a great score. Jack Black in this movie plays a film composer, and I think he's at a video store in the movie at some point, and he mimics the Driving Miss Daisy soundtrack, if I remember right. But yeah, there's definitely a reference to Hans Zimmer from Jack Black's character in this movie, and the score is great. If you're looking for like a charming Hans Zimmer output, The Holiday is definitely it. I think this is probably my favorite Pirate score. I feel like this has happened a few times where Hans Zimmer's come in by himself to compose the second of a trilogy or series of films. So he came on by himself. Klaus Badelt, again, had done the first one, the first Pirates, and then Zimmer came in to kind of help out with the themes, and then he wrote this stuff. This first track on this album, Dead Man's Chest, which is the sequel, the second Pirates film, Jack Sparrow is what it's called, track 1. Jack Sparrow is great. There's so many great moments in it. It's definitely a go-to listen if I'm going to be putting on some of Hans's music. It's a really good score if you're looking for it. It makes me think I like the movie more than I do. That's how good it is. So then after that, he's going to work with his buddy Ron Howard again on the Da Vinci Code. This movie is not good, but this soundtrack is pretty good, actually. It's really good. It also kind of gave, I think, Hans Zimmer the ability to work on something kind of like The Ring. It's not a horror film, but there's definitely elements in this series of films, the Da Vinci Code and the other ones that he did, that kind of bleed a little bit into the horror aspect that are good. Then he went next year. Oh, sorry, I've not been keeping track of years. I think we're in 2007 now. Pirates number 3, which came out 1 year after Pirates 2, which came out in 2006. Pirates of the World Ends is fun. He was able to kind of branch out. I believe they go to Asia in this film, and so there's that would make sense because there's a track called Singapore on it. There's some good themes and some good motifs. He kind of takes the pirate stuff that you know and does a few little different things with it that are pretty good in this film. It's or pretty good on the score. It's a good one to listen to. After that, he worked on the Simpsons movie, which is weird to me. I don't know why. Danny Elfman had composed the original theme for the TV show. I'm wondering still to this day, honestly, why they wouldn't have just reached out to Danny Elfman to do the music to the movie. But nonetheless, Hans Zimmer did it. It's got a fun case. What? See what happened there? Whoa. I really don't remember much from this score at all, but there you have it. And he was back at Madagascar. There's the first track on this, Once Upon a Time in Africa, is really good. It's a really nice reworking of that Zooster's Breakout theme from the first Madagascar, which is kind of the go-to listen if you're going to listen to this film. It's the main theme, I feel like, of those films. Then he was on to another animated film, Kung Fu Panda, which he worked with So it's music by Hans Zimmer and John Powell. John Powell, I don't know when they started working together, but John Powell has been doing a lot of films for a long time, and I want to say Zimmer produced Face Off, like back in the late 97, I think, and Zimmer produced it and John Powell did the music to it. So I don't know if Powell had started off working with Zimmer in his company Remote Control or not, but they worked together on this one, and it is good. It's a really good listen. Back with Ron Howard. Movie I keep telling myself I'll watch it. Every time it gets close on the top of my Netflix DVD queue, I just move it down. I don't know why. I just get really uninterested in watching it. That said, this score is great. I actually really like it. For a movie of his I've never seen, of Zimmer's that I've never seen, this score is quite good. it makes me want to watch it, and then, like I said, I just move it down, man. I just can't get excited about it. Dark Knight, of course, very famous. Well, the movie is famous. I don't know about the music. They did something very different. I remember seeing, I feel like actually when you went to the movie theater to see this, there was, one of those like pre-show entertainment things at AMC that they do, where it was like a behind the scenes on the music. I could be lying. That could have been something I saw online, but for some reason I feel like I saw that in the theater. And so the first track, Why So Serious, is going over like the Joker's theme in this, and Zimmer did some interesting things with it. I want to say like using, a violin bow on a guitar or something like that. Not like something that had never been done before in music, just something different for soundtrack music. And the score is good. It's very good. Got like, you see the Batman symbol there. It's a nice looking output. I remember Chris Nolan, the director of this, talking about something about like he wasn't sure that he would want to come back for those films, but when he heard Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, who did this one as well with him again, when he heard their ideas for the music for this one again, Chris Nolan got like really excited about working on the Batman films again. So I don't know how true that is, but there you go. Sherlock Holmes. This movie may not be great, but the soundtrack sure is. It's a really fun. Guy Ritchie, man, he makes fun films. The soundtrack is a blast. He worked with Lorne Balfe on this. So Lorne Balfe is a name starting, this is 2009, I think now. I think for the last 9 years, since 9 or 10 years since then, since here, he kind of worked with this guy Lorne Balfe a lot, like on co-writing a lot of stuff. And this guy Lorne Balfe just did last year, 2018, the best soundtrack of the last year, the Mission Impossible Fallout soundtrack, which is great. Angels and Demon, back with Ron Howard, back in the Da Vinci Code world. This score is probably the best of this trilogy of films. This track 160 BPM is great, and also the last song on here called 503 is really good. There's some really nice violin work by Joshua Bell, who's a great violinist. It's a good soundtrack. This movie is worse somehow. I don't know how it could be possible, but it's worse than the Da Vinci Code, but the soundtrack is better. So good job, Hans. And then something he's pretty famous for, I feel like, Inception. I mean, maybe just with film nerds like myself, but the score is great. It's really good. It's not my favorite of his work with Chris Nolan, but it is really good. It's sort of most notable, I feel like, for working with the great Johnny Marr. I think this is the first instance where he started working with Johnny Marr. He's worked with him a handful of times since then, but Johnny Marr is the guitar player from the Smiths, if you don't know. Also worked on this with, of course, his buddy Lorne Balfe, who we just heard a moment ago. But Inception is really good. It's worth checking out. There's a vinyl release of this. I feel like that's a clear edition vinyl. I've heard it's good, but that sounds good. I just haven't picked that up yet. Anyone on another animation film here? Megamind, Will Ferrell, and Brad Pitt. Is that right? That's right. I don't remember this movie at all. The music is good though. It's not as good as Kung Fu Panda or Madagascar, but it's a good animation soundtrack. Then he worked on this movie though. I'm really unsure of how much of this he worked on. It's, I think, Henry IV, based on a play that had been written at the time. So he worked on this with Henry Jackman. Henry Jackman has composed a lot of his own things in the last 10 years. Henry Jackman definitely came from Remote Control, that company that Hans Zimmer sort of runs. He was definitely a composer that worked with Zimmer for a long time. It's my understanding that Henry Jackman wrote most of this and that Zimmer's more of a producer on this, but he did get a composing credit, so I don't really know. It's good though, regardless, if Henry Jackman did it or if Zimmer did, I don't know. Then he worked on this TV miniseries, The Pacific, which was the follow-up to Band of Brothers. Not the follow-up, but it's kind of like Band of Brothers, but in the Pacific. It's good. He worked with a couple other guys that come from the Hans Zimmer school of music. Jeff Zanelli and Blake Neely. That's weird, that rhymes. Blake Neely, I think is probably how you say that. It's good. It's war music, right? What are you gonna do? It's good. So now we're into 2011, I think, and this movie Rango. I want to like this movie. I don't really like it at all, but the soundtrack is great. It's really fun. It's similar to this sort of Western action vibe that Zimmer did on the Lone Ranger, which I also don't own. But this is a really good score. It's really fun. I'll listen to this later, I think. So then he's back for some more Pirates, and the last one that he would compose, which is the fourth Pirates film, on Stranger Tides. This is actually a really fun soundtrack. He got Rodrigo and Gabriella, you know, the guitar guys, guitar group, to work with him on this, and it's fun. There's a lot of that like Spanish influence here, and or Latin influence. I don't know actually if they're from Spain or if they're Latin, so sorry, but it's good. It's really good, worth checking out for sure. Then he's back with Kung Fu Panda movies, kind of more of the same, working with John Powell again. I actually think I like this score better than the first one. If you're gonna check out one of the Kung Fu Pandas, check out Kung Fu Panda 2. Then he's back, Sherlock Holmes, getting into like a lot of him doing, you know, a lot of big films, I guess. Sherlock Holmes 2, the movie, is much better than the first one. I actually really enjoyed this film, and the score is really great. What is those? Some tracks on here. Oh yeah, the song "It's So Overt, It's Covert," great. Oh, he does a reworking of Two Mules for Sister Sarah, which is great. A great old Morricone soundtrack, I think, if I remember right. But yeah, this is good. It's worth checking out. This is my favorite score of the Batman trilogy that Chris Nolan did. It's really good. The music that he wrote for Bane is wonderful. The movie is not very good, but definitely the weakest film, but the best score, which is so weird to me that can happen, but that definitely does happen. The music is great. No James Newton Howard on this one, although obviously those same themes are all over this place. James Newton Howard didn't actually work on this one, but there's some really good stuff in this. If you're going to check out these soundtracks, don't forget about this one just because the movie's bad. It's really good. Madagascar 3, another third of a film series. It's good, and again, there's a couple good reworkings of that sort of Zeuster's breakout main theme. Madagascar 3, check it out. Not much else to say there. This is some cool packaging, Man of Steel. So it's this like steelbook thing. I don't know. I mean, it's not necessary, but it is fun to have. It's kind of cool on the inside. It's 2 discs. You know, and there's a great little booklet in here. Lots of nice pictures from the recording sessions. Like here you go, you can kind of see them in their recording. So this one it's a good score. There's a lot of percussion stuff that happens in this, and that's exactly what's going on in this. This is basically a square of percussion drum people, percussionists, getting ready to record some stuff. And so on this one, he worked with this guy, Tom Holkenberg, who's also known as Junkie XL, who had started to do a lot of film music around this time as well, had worked with Zimmer a few times, and so he kind of worked with him on this in creating that like percussive driving sort of beat that I feel like this film is kind of known for. I mean, at least that's in my mind, I think about that. There's one track in particular on this score, let me just find it really fast in case you're curious, that I feel like you kind of get everything you're looking for on this soundtrack. Is there a track listing? Oh no, I'm wasting sweet, valuable time, everybody. I'm so sorry. It's like, what are you gonna do when you're fighting? What are you gonna do when you're not fighting? Well, there's no track listing here. Something about, it's asking a question. That's a Superman question. It's really good. Anyway, the soundtrack is good. 12 Years a Slave. There's only a couple tracks on here by him. It's actually a nice compilation soundtrack. His song Solomon that's on here is the only one that's long. The other track I think is like 30 seconds long, but Solomon is maybe 3.5 minutes, and it's a nice piece of music from the film. Rush, working with Ron Howard again. I really liked this movie. I remember being really surprised. It's no Days of Thunder, the score, but it is still really good. I definitely recommend checking this out. For later Zimmer, it's pretty good. It's kind of reminiscent of like some of the action stuff he did in the 90s for sure. Then he worked on this TV miniseries, The Bible. I never saw it. The music is good. He worked with some of his favorites, Lorne Balfe, and also of the Gladiator days, Lisa Gerrard. Lisa Gerrard was the vocalist that he used most famously on Gladiator. Worked with her again on something else right after that I can't remember actually, that I'm sure I went through and forgot about, but he works with her again here, and it's good. The score is good. Winter's Tale, he composed with Rupert Gregson Williams. Rupert Gregson Williams is related to Harry Gregson Williams, though I can never remember if they're brothers, if one of them is the father and the son. Rupert to me sounds like would be younger, but I think Rupert is older. But maybe Rupert is younger? I don't know. Anyway, I think Hans Zimmer really just did a couple of the main themes on here. It's more of a Rupert Gregson Williams score, but this movie, man, is really bad. But the score is actually not so bad. It's pretty good. Don't watch it. Interstellar. I love this soundtrack. It's really great. This is probably my favorite, definitely my favorite Chris Nolan, Hans Zimmer collaboration. This also has some sweet packaging. I love this little, like, I don't know if you can see this little like compass thing going on here. It's pretty sweet with the star wheel. This score is great. Again, kind of like Thin Red Line or Last Samurai or Broken Arrow or even The Rock, even though that's not all him. This is something you can put on, listen to all the way through, and it really stays with you. It's a really nice pieces of music on here. I never really got into classical music, but this is sort of my, this is my classical music, like stuff like this. And Interstellar is a really wonderful piece of music. And then back to the miniseries world again. He's now on to Son of God after the Bible. This one is good too. It's not as good as the Bible miniseries, but it's good. Worth checking out if you're into that. Some fun packaging here for Amazing Spider-Man 2. I have no idea why he got dragged into this one and not the first Amazing Spider-Man, right? This is the sequel? Yeah. But for some reason he did, and this has got cool packaging. It's kind of fun. A lot of fun stuff. Woo! So this is credited to Hans Zimmer in The Magnificent Six, featuring Pharrell Williams and Johnny Marr. So Pharrell Williams, he started working with around this time, and Johnny Marr, those two are part of The Magnificent Six. And I believe the other people are this guy, Lauren Balfe, and there's another one of those composer guys who are part of that. But man, I did not see this movie. I could not care less about the film, in fact. But the soundtrack is really good. It's, is it his best? No, but there's some inspiring stuff to be found in here, and it's fun. I mean, he seems excited about it, working on it, and that you can kind of feel that when you're listening to it. It's cool. It's worth checking out. The Little Prince, he works with Richard Harvey and featuring vocalist Camille. I have not seen this, but kind of like that German animated polar bear thing I hadn't really seen. There's some really good stuff on here, really sweet stuff. It's always nice to see that softer side of Hans. Little Prince. Check it out. A movie that I did not see. Freeheld. So here he composed it with Johnny Marr. I did not see this movie. This soundtrack release is kind of funny to me. There's 28 minutes of music, if I'm right. I have it in my notes, but I feel like it was definitely under a half hour of music on this soundtrack, which I thought was funny. It also just seemed like one of those like made-to-order kinds of things. There's like a, we got that, UPC bar right there, and this was the best thing about it to me. The front cover and the first two, it's like the print is bad. It's like they printed it, but then that white, it's like that wasn't cut off properly. Just, it's very bad. It's very, when I was looking through this, and the quality of the pictures is not good. It's a legitimate release that feels like it wasn't a legitimate release. The music is fine, by the way. This music is great. Chappie is an okay movie, but the music is so good. It's kind of, it's like the only time Hans Zimmer, who's always been he's like always been electronic based. He's done a lot of different things over his career, but this is the only time where he's using his electronic thing in sort of the current, at the time, new way it was really popular. It's very like EDM sounding. He worked with this guy, Steve Mazzaro, who's on his crew, and then this other person whose last name I don't know how to pronounce, but Andrew Kowalnicki, something like that. And I think it's one of these guys, I think Andrew Kowalnicki, whatever his name is. I think that guy kind of had like this techno-y sort of influence, but the score is great. It's really pretty banging, and there's a lot of great, like, if you're into EDM music and you're like, oh, maybe I should listen to some scores too, this would be the one to check out. It'd be a good intro into it. It's really good, actually. Very good soundtrack. This movie, Woman in Gold, I think is an underrated film and an underrated score. He worked on it with Martin Phipps. And from what I've read, Hans Zimmer did all of the flashback sequences in the film, or primarily did the flashback sequences, where this guy Martin did the current stuff that is happening with Ryan Reynolds and, wow, I can't believe, I can't think of her name. That's so sad. Her name is, it's going to really bother me, Helen Mirren. Oh my God, how terrible. I love Helen Mirren. How did I forget that? Anyway, so there's flashbacks of Helen Mirren's character back in the day when she was kind of growing up. And apparently that's the stuff that Zimmer did. But the whole score is really, really great. It's a very underrated piece of music that Zimmer has worked on in his later career. Kung Fu Panda 3, now he's here without John Powell, who he had worked with on the first two, but still worth checking out. He did I think just the main theme, yeah. So then he worked on this miniseries Planet Earth 2. He did the main theme. Main theme is very good. This whole soundtrack is really good, actually. It's very good. Check it out. It's a double disc set. A couple years ago, I think 2016 is where we're at now. Yep. He released this, somebody released this, the Milan years. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So there's 2 discs. The first CD is that entire A World Apart soundtrack, which I already have. But I bought this because there are 3 tracks from My Beautiful Laundrette, which I didn't have anywhere else. And they're really good. Again, like I don't know why there hasn't been a release of that officially yet, but it's worth having just for that. And you can find this pretty affordable now, which is great. And finally get to close out the old Da Vinci Code series with Inferno. This soundtrack is fine. I remember liking it. It's not as good as Angels and Demon, but it's worth checking out if you're a completist or just a nerd or looking to torture yourself. The Crown, he did the main theme for this. Who did the score? Oh, Rupert Gregson-Williams, which he worked on Winter's Tale and a bunch of other things. Rupert Gregson-Williams, most recently, I feel like is famous for doing Wonder Woman. That score is really great, by the way. It's impressive that the main theme and the next tracks that follow it on the soundtrack they flow really nicely together. You know, there's obviously a good working relationship between those guys. Hidden Figures, he's working with Pharrell Williams, and this guy he's been working with the last few, I don't know, I guess the last 10 years really, Benjamin Wallfish, I think is how you say his name. It's a good soundtrack. It's a charming movie, and the music is also very likable. There is a soundtrack release as well that didn't have any score music, but this definitely has all of the score music, which is good. And then he worked with that guy Junkie XL that I was talking about earlier. He worked with Man of Steel. They co-composed the Batman vs. Superman soundtrack. Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Very exciting. I honestly don't remember the music very well in this movie. I think this is where the Wonder Woman theme comes into play. It's fine, it's kind of a fun release. It's very you can see all the artwork if you're really into this movie for any reason. But it's good. I guess it's worth checking out because that's where you first hear that Wonder Woman theme, which is pretty fun. He worked on the main theme for this TV show I think they're doing a few of these, but Genius. This is the one about Einstein. So the music is by his friend Lauren Balfe, but Zimmer, did the theme to that, which is good. And then after that, he worked on Dunkirk. We're now in 2017. Dunkirk is very good. It's got a lot of droning, that sort of, I feel like Inception is where he really started doing loud, droning, slow, sort of electronic sounds that almost sound like waves of music. That's all over Dunkirk. Very rhythmic. It's like rhythmic droning, I suppose. And on this one, he worked a lot with, I think, that guy Benjamin Wallfish. And there's some themes in this that were built off of Sir Edward Elgar, who was a composer, I think a German composer, from back in the day. He did the Blade Runner soundtrack with this guy, Benjamin Wallfish again, Blade Runner 2049. The score is good. I was listening to it recently thinking if you were going up into space, this would be a great soundtrack to listen to. Or if you just are at home, close your eyes and crank it way up, you'll feel like you've gone to space or are going to space, or it will just give you a headache. It's very loud. I mean, talk about this droning thing that he's doing, this loud sort of waves of sound that's all over this music, man. I was thinking that if I had listened to this at the wrong volume, I would definitely have had a headache. It was quite intense. It's good though. That's a good soundtrack. It's double disc, by the way. It's worth checking out, and some nice art. So then Hans Zimmer finally took his music out and toured it around. And so here we've got Hans Zimmer live in Prague, which is a very good representation of the show. I went to the show when he was here in Los Angeles 2 years ago, and it's good. It was a good show, but this is great. There's also a Blu-ray if you want to watch the show, but it's got a lot of the hits on here, right? So he's got Driving Miss Daisy, Sherlock Holmes, Madagascar, Crimson Tide, Gladiator, Lion King, Pirates, Interstellar, Inception, Dark Knight, Trilogy, Thin Red Line, all this kind of stuff, True Romance, Rain Man. So a lot of the stuff that he really likes or that was popular is on this, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's not your usual live CD because it doesn't. Yeah, it's good. It's worth checking out. Blue Planet 2, kind of like Planet Earth 2, but Blue Planet 2. He actually composed all of the music with this guy Jacob Shea and David Fleming. It's a really nice piece. And I think on Record Store Day last year, 2017, 2 years ago, was this 18? 2017, a couple years ago. I think they released this on like a special edition blue vinyl. I did not get that because a bunch of people went to the store, bought it to flip it online. I do not approve of that. Sometimes I do, I guess. So then he's working with this guy, Steve Mazzaro, who he's been working with recently on this movie, The Boss Baby. I did not see this movie. My nephew apparently really likes it. The music is good. It's cute. It's good. Yeah. And then finally, last year, now we're in 2019. In 2018, I think the only thing he released was Boss Baby 2018? No, 17. The only thing he released last year was this movie Widows, which I have not seen yet. I want to see. The music is really good. There's half of it is score music, a little bit more than half of it is score music, and then there's a couple tracks on there. A new song, I think, in fact, by Sade, which is good, and a Nina Simone song that I love, Wild as the Wind. But the soundtrack is good. Very minimal, very simple, but it is worth checking out for sure. So I guess that's it. I guess that's all the stuff. I'm sure I've talked long enough. I have these notes that I didn't really go through. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. But let's. What are your guys' favorite Hans Zimmer scores? What are things I missed? What are things I should own that I don't have? Let's get a discussion going about Hans Zimmer and friends. Until next time, it's been fun. Right? I feel like I missed some stuff probably. 1 hour, 10 minutes.